Hi, this is Andy and Sharon McClellan from Father's House. Welcome to this teaching session. We pray that you will be blessed and grow as a result of listening today.
So today I've got an unusual talk. I talked about the Great Re-Scape. A few weeks ago, I was doing ETP, which is Equipping the Prophets, and Sharon set us a task about reading Romans 4, verse 17. And if we believed it, how would it change our ministry if we believed it was true for us? And Romans 4:17 says, as it is written, I have made you a father of many nations. He's talking about Abraham. He is our father in the sight of God, in whom he believed, the God who gives life to the dead and calls into being things that were not. So I prepared I had to do a 3-minute video explaining how that would affect me, and based on that verse. And quickly things came to mind, and I wrote down 5 R's. It's words that begin with R-E, re. So I jotted them down, and I spoke for 1 minute and 46 seconds in total. Now that might give you hope today for the message not being too long. You might think that was a miraculous thing for a speaker to only do 1 minute and 46 seconds. But I think this might take a little bit longer. And so a lot of what I'm going to be talking about this morning is based on those ideas, on that idea. And there might be some extra REs in there, and there might be some that are changed. So the sermon heading is based on the REs. I thought it was quite clever, and then I realized that there's so many words with RE in front of it, so it wasn't quite as clever as I thought it was. But I'll give you an example of an RE word: repost. Repost, repost, repost this message afterwards, because then it gets out there, doesn't it? Okay, so as I was preparing this message, I was starting to think. I had some ideas in my head that were coming in my head, but also I had the Great Escape, the film The Great Escape music playing through my head, and I couldn't stop thinking about the Great Escape. And one of the things I've learned at ETP, and I think a lot of other people have been doing it, that's Equipping the Prophets, if you want to look it up later on. One of the things I've learned is when you hear something like that in your inner voice, or you hear a word, you shouldn't disregard it. So this morning you've got a combination of the two things, and some of my talk is based on The Great Escape. The film The Great Escape was made in 1963, and it was based on a true story about a prisoner of war camp in the middle of Germany. And basically what they did was they made this camp so it was virtually unescapable, and they put all the prisoners that kept on escaping in this one camp, which wasn't, in retrospect, isn't really a great idea. So obviously they were very, very accomplished at escaping from places. But the whole point was that 76 of the prisoners managed to escape through a tunnel, which unfortunately fell short of the trees that they wanted to get to. But 76 prisoners escaped. Over 100,000 troops were dispersed around the country looking for these 76. So for some reason, we always used to watch The Great Escape over the Christmas period. And we always waiting to see Steve McQueen failing to jump over the barbed wire fence to escape the hand of captivity. So I used to love that film, and it still holds up now. I watched it the other day because I was preparing this. But thing is that we can all feel like we're imprisoned. We might not even realize that we need to escape. We might be in a way, we might have things in our life that we need to get away from. And you may be captive, prisoner of things, of thoughts and ideas that have come to you. But Jesus, well, in Isaiah, it says it says, the Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me, because the Lord has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives, and to release from darkness release from darkness for the prisoners. Prisons take on many different shapes and sizes. And you can even find prisons in palaces. You can have a palace, you can have lots of wealth and still be a prisoner. So one of the things I noticed about the film when I rewatched it was when they all arrive at the camp, they all arrive pretty much together on the first day. And all the prisoners are looking for an escape straight away. A lot of them actually make an attempt on the first day to escape. The thing is, they don't want to be stuck in there. Obviously, they want to escape. They want to find any way they can. But the danger is with all of us is that we can get to a situation where we're happy to be captive, or where we settle into what we have. Well, actually, these things aren't as bad as they could be. I'll just settle down and settle for second best. We can't do that because we've been set free. Okay, it's like if you might have seen animals that have been caged and they go to release them into the wild and they won't leave the cage. You become trapped in that surrounding. So as we go into this talk, we're going to be looking quite extensively through Genesis. So get ready, get your wire cutters ready, your rope, your false papers, your shovels, and then we'll go. Why is it always pages stick together when you're speaking? I don't know. So actually, all you need is your Bible. You can't really dig with the Bible. You can't cut fences with the Bible. You can't climb walls with it. You have to read it to make it work. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to be looking through the Bible. I suppose you could stand on it, but I don't think that's what it means to stand on the word. I think that's something else. Right, so first one, the first re is regrets. Now, re, I'll probably get this wrong, Emma. Re, the word forming element means to go back or back to the original place. Also, again, anew, once more, also conveying the notion of undoing or backward, etc. In the Latin, it's had inseparable prefix, whatever that is, meaning again, back, anew, against. So all my headings are going to be re's, okay? So I was thinking about regrets, and you know when people say, oh, well, oh, yes, I've lived my life. I've done wrong things, I've done bad things, but I don't have any regrets. If I had to do it all over again, I'd do it all over again. And to that, I say, no, I don't feel like that at all. There's lots of things I'd like to have changed and not done, and people I wouldn't want to harm and everything else. But I guess when we make mistakes, we learn to understand other people when they make their mistakes. We can sympathize with people. It means that we're not so hard-hearted. We learn from our own experience of our shortcomings. That, if you like, we fall short of the target, like they did with the tunnel. When they fell short, we kind of fall short of the things that we should be or should do. And it's through Christ's grace that we're saved, not through our works. You know, we can't work our way out of what we've done wrong or when we've done things wrong. So we're going to look at two basic Bible heroes. But one was Joseph. We always talk about Joseph and his dreams, etc., etc. But the other is Judah. And right from the word go with this, I was thinking about Judah. And I can't remember where it came from, but I was thinking about Judah because he's an interesting character. So what the Bible does is it runs a parallel between Judah and Joseph throughout the passage that we're going to look at. I think we have to be aware as we sort of embark on this journey, the importance of family, especially within Judaism. Family is really crucial. And he basically got this family together through Abraham and built a family. For the 12 tribes. He got them together to be his nation. And here we're going to look at this from how the whole idea is that they'll have successive generations and a nation to follow under God. Okay, I know you guys probably know all this stuff, but it's just quite interesting because it all starts with 12 boys, if you like, the start of the nation. So they would have been aware of what was said to Abraham. It wasn't that long ago in many ways. It's been passing down the generations. It's something they wanted to continue. They have this narrative that what their role is, what they have to do, what they have to be, that God has actually chosen them for a purpose, to be his nation. The question, of course, is whether they follow that. So we're going to go to Genesis 37. If you want to look in your Bibles, you can, but I'm going to read it as well. We find a family which has the 12, as it were. Well, I think it was 11 initially, but they're in disarray. They're divided through jealousy and ambition and the desire for inheritance and approval. So we go to Joseph's dreams in chapter 37. So there is a bit of reading in this today. I did try and think how could I do this without reading it, but actually it's probably quite quicker doing it reading. So Jacob lived in the land where his father had stayed, the land of Canaan. This is the account of Jacob's family line. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah. His father's wives and he brought their father a bad report about them. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons because he'd been born in his old age, and he made an ornate robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. Now, each of them, I was reading some notes on this, now each of them would have been given a shirt, but Joseph got given 2 shirts. It's like a double blessing. He's treating him like he's going to be the heir to the dynasty, I guess, the one that's going to carry the name through. And so he gets given the 2nd shirt, double blessing. Reuben should have been the one that was receiving that because he was the oldest brother. So in terms of passing things on and passing the mantle, I guess, Reuben should have been the one. So we go down to verse 5. Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even all the more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream I had. We were building binding sheaves of grain out in the field, when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it." His brother said to him, "Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?" And they hated him all the more because of his dream, what he'd said. Now, when we were doing ETP, one of the things we were taught was how to deliver a message to somebody, when to deliver a message, and how to do it in a proper way. Unfortunately, Joseph seemed to lack this teaching. So he was very good at developing the enemies of his brothers. And he had similar dreams of a similar vein, but I'm not going to go into them because we're not looking at Joseph today, really. We're looking at Judah. Now, if we go down to Genesis 37 to the verse 12, he says, "Now his brothers had gone to graze their father's flocks near Shechem, and Israel said to Joseph, 'As you know, your brothers are grazing their flocks near Shechem. Come, and I will come. I am going to send you to them.' 'Very well,' he replied," going down to 17. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them near Dothan. But they saw him from a distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. 'Here comes that dreamer,' they said to each other. 'Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say that this ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams.'" So this whole future nation to the world is in trouble already. It's already in trouble. So when Reuben heard this, he tried to rescue him from their hands. "Let's not take his life," he said. "Don't shed any blood. Throw him into the cistern that here in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him." Reuben said this to rescue him from them and take him back to his father. So Reuben goes off somewhere. Don't know why. Don't know when. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the ornate robe he was wearing, and they took him and threw him to the cistern. The cistern was empty. There was no water in it. And as they sat down to eat their meal, they looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead, and their camels were loaded with spices, balm and myrrh, and they went were on their way to take them down to Egypt. And Judah said to his brothers, "What will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay a hand on him. After all, he's a brother of our own flesh and his blood, of our own flesh and blood." His brothers agreed. So when the Midianites merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph up out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. And when Reuben returned to the cistern and saw that Joseph was not there, he tore his clothes. He went back to his brothers and said, "The boy isn't there. Where can I turn now?" And then they got Joseph's robe, slaughtered a goat, and dipped it in robe in blood. And they took the ornate robe back to their father and said, "We found this. Examine it to see whether it is your son's robe." But this whole passage reminds me of Christ, obviously, because it's being sold for silver. He's got a shirt like Christ's shirt was sold because it was seamless. And the Romans paid for it, didn't they? So there's obviously, and of course there's the blood as well. There's obviously a kind of foretelling of what's going to happen to Jesus in some ways. But they kind of are very aware. I think Judah's very aware of the history, like Cain and Abel, how the blood cools out from the ground. He's very aware of those things, and I think that's why he partly chose to just sell him off, to actually do like the chief rabbis and did with Christ, basically to pass it on to somebody else to deal with rather than them. So he didn't actually shed the blood, he just passed it on to somebody else and send him into slavery. So their father is absolutely devastated, inconsolable. And so we have now this family where Joseph has gone off into captivity to Egypt, and Judah is implicated by what he's done. And Judah then does something unusual. He actually leaves the home. So we've got one dead and one left from the plan of the 12. So why did he leave his father's house? Well, some of the suggestions are that he regretted what he'd done, or that maybe that Reuben kicked him out of the house and said, "Look, I'm expose you," or whatever. So he left the home. So this family, it's what promised to Abraham, one son, possibly dead, and one left under his own off to do his own rule, have his own family. He's in fact an exile. He's like a prisoner in a sense. I think they all are kind of prisoners at this point in different ways. So we go down to chapter 38. At this time, Judah left his brothers and went to stay with a man, Adullam, named Hirah. And there Judah met a daughter of the Canaanite man named Shua, and he married her. It's interesting here, they don't mention her name, which means that she's not probably a very good person. I think the Bible does that, doesn't always mention the names. And he made love to her. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son, and his name was E-R. And she conceived again and gave birth to a son and named him Onan. And she gave birth to still another son and named him Shelah. And this was that at this time it was at a place called Kezib, which actually apparently could mean deception. So it might explain a bit about why she's not mentioned. Maybe she's a bit of a deceiver. So she gave birth to him, and then so Judah got a wife for and it's quite interesting. This is all going after Joseph just gone. This is like I was reading up information on this, and people were saying that's basically because the Bible is showing you something in parallel. It doesn't just focus on Joseph; it's focused on Judah for a reason. So he got his first wife. Her name was Tamar, but Judah's, sorry, I'm erring as I'm saying, but Judah's firstborn was wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death. So that's number one down. And then Judah said to Onan, sleep with your brother's wife and fulfill your duty to her as a brother-in-law to raise up offspring for your brother. But Onan knew that the child would not be his, so whenever he slept with his brother's wife, he spilled his semen on the ground to keep him from providing offspring for his brother. What he did was wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death also. Not going down well, is it? I think Judah's having a bit of a hard time here. So then Judah said to his daughter-in-law, Tamar, live as a widow in your father's household until my son Shelah grows up, for he thought he may die too, just like his brothers. So basically, Judah is concerned about his well-being as well, and he's really not thinking about her and the tradition, obviously, for the kinsman redeemer. This so she went to live in her father's household. So this is a bit like the story of Ruth and Boaz, and we saw that in the story. We see that in the story where Boaz becomes the kinsman redeemer for Ruth, and with a similar situation here. It's a responsibility to keep the line going. So after a long time, Judah's wife, the daughter of Shua, died, and when Judah had recovered from his grief, he went to Timnah to the men who were shearing his sheep, and his friend Hirah, the Adullamite, went with him. And when Tamar was told, your father-in-law is on his way to Timnah to shear his sheep, she took off her widow's clothes, covered herself with a veil and disguised herself, and sat down at the entrance to Enaim, in which is a road to Timnah, for she saw that though Shelah had now grown up, she had not been given him as his wife. One minute. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, for she'd covered her face, not realizing that she was his daughter-in-law. He went over to her by the roadside and said, come now, let me sleep with you. And what will you give me if you sleep with me? She asked. And he said, I'll send you a young goat from my flock, he said. Will you give me something as a pledge until you send it? She asked. And he said, what pledge shall I give you? Your seal and its cord, and the staff in your hands, she answered. So he gave them to her, slept with her, and she became pregnant by him. After she left, she took off her veil and put on her widow's clothes again. Meanwhile, Judah sent the young goat by his friend Adullamite in order to get his pledge back from the woman, but he did not find her. And he asked the men who lived there, where is the shrine prostitute who was beside the road at Enaim? And there hasn't been any shrine prostitute here, they said. So he went back to Judah and said, I didn't find her. Besides, the man who lived there said there hasn't been a shrine prostitute here. So then Judah said, let her keep what she has, or we will become a laughing stock. After all, I did send her this young goat, but didn't find her. About 3 months later, Judah was told, your daughter-in-law Tamar is guilty of prostitution, and as a result, she is now pregnant. And Judah said, bring her out and have her burned to death. Very dramatic, isn't it? Very, very dramatic. It doesn't hold back, does he? And as she was being brought out, she sent a message to her father-in-law, I am pregnant by a man who owns these, she said, and she added, see, if you recognize the seal and the cord, these and staff, these are. Yeah, it's quite interesting. If you go back to Genesis 37, 31, 32, then Joseph's robe slaughtered, then they got Joseph's robe and slaughtered a goat and dipped the robe in the blood, and they took the ornate robe back to her father and said, we found this, examine it, see whether it is your son's robe. It's like a flashback to what he did to his father. It's like, here's the evidence, what's going on. It's like it's been put right in his face now by her. She's brought it right before him, and he then recognizes his guilt. He sees that of his action, the result of his actions, I think. because Judah recognized them and said, she is more righteous than I, since I wouldn't give her to my son Sheila, and he did not sleep with her again. So, as I say, this demonstrates his guilt, and I think it provides a flashback. So when the time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb, and as she was giving birth, one of them put out his hand, so the midwife took a scarlet thread and tied it to his wrist, and then this one came out first. But when he drew back his hand, his brother came out, and she said, "So this is how you have broken out." And he was named Perez. And then his brother had the scarlet thread on his wrist, and his name was Zerah. His attempts here really to have his own nation, or to break away from the family, hasn't really worked, has it? It's really come down to this, and the whole passage really is about birthrights and bloodlines. So next point, number 2, rewind. I've always been I can be a bit of a big mouth sometimes and say the wrong things, and I've joked and said the wrong thing at times. And when you say something awful or you do something terrible, and your stomach sinks and you're exposed, and you want the earth to swallow you up, literally. You get that awful feeling. You come to the realization of what you've done, and it's all too late. You can't rewind it. And as I was thinking about rewind, I was thinking about the old cassette tapes. We used to get the pencil and wind it back. I don't know why I thought that, but that's kind of what I was thinking about. That you want to rewind, you want to turn everything back, like we had Adam and Eve. They let the cat out of the bag, didn't they? And we had the flood, and we had the Tower of Babel. All these things happened, but they couldn't be reversed. There's no turning back. There's no rewind. You can't delete the moments. You can't rewind and start again. It's not like the movies. But there's an opportunity for redemption through Christ. There is an opportunity to work through this, because obviously Christ put into place the fact that he came along was a response to what happened in the garden. He put that response in. He brought Jesus in. So number 3 is redemption. If you're feeling regret right now, unfortunately, as I said, you can't go back. But you also shouldn't just stay in the past. There's no benefit for either the one you've harmed or for you to stay in the past, to stay trapped, or to live in unforgiveness for those that have harmed you. There's no way through with that. There's only one way through, and that's through Christ and redemption, the redemption path. So I'm not going to cover Joseph's story too much. I'm going to want to go a bit further on to see what's happening here with Judah, and how things are transformed. So Joseph had been a prisoner, but he managed to work his way up to be the second in command. And there was a great famine in the land, and because he read Pharaoh's dream, or he understood Pharaoh's dream and interpreted it, he actually was able to implement a scheme in which to save grain for 7 years of plenty for the 7 years of famine. And this meant that the family, Joseph's family, were able to come and get grain to try and survive for their family, because it was a famine throughout the land. And at this point, we see that Judah has returned back to his family. And they eventually come before Joseph, and there's a whole series of events, but basically a silver cup is planted in one of the sacks of grain. They don't recognize Joseph, but there's this cup, and one thing leads to another, and it means that they're gonna have to. He says, right, well, Joseph recognizes them, and he says, right, well, okay, I'm going to have to take one of you as a kind of hostage if you're going to come back for more grain, and that's going to be Benjamin. So, okay, so this is a pretty bad situation, because Jacob's already lost Joseph, and now Benjamin's at stake. I mean, you can read all this later on, but I just wanted to look at what Judah does and to see his redemption, because this is his point of redemption. Then, so Benjamin's in jail. Then Judah went up to him and said, "Pardon your servant, my lord. Let me speak a word to my lord. Do not be angry with your servant, though you are equal to Pharaoh himself. My lord," this is Genesis 44, by the way. "Do not be angry with your servant, though you're equal to Pharaoh himself. My lord asked his servants, 'Do you have a father or a brother?' And we answered, 'We have an aged father, and there is a young son born to him in his old age. His brother is dead, and he is the only one of his mother's sons left, and his father loves him." So 3:1. Then you said to your servants, "Bring him down to me, and I will see him for myself." And we said to my lord, "The boy cannot leave his father. If he leaves, he will die. But you told your servants, unless your youngest brother comes down with you, you will not see my face again." And when we went back to your servant, my father, we told him, and my lord said, then our father said, "Go back and buy a little more food." But we said, "We cannot go down. Only if your youngest brother is with us, we will go. And we cannot see the man's face unless our youngest brother is with us." And your servant, my father, said to us, you know that my wife bore me 2 sons. One of them went away from me, and I said, "He is surely being torn to pieces, and I will not see him again. If you take this one from me too, and harm comes to him, you will bring my grey head down to the grave in misery." So, so now, if the boy is not with us when I go back to your servant, my father, and if my father, whose life is closely bound up with the boy's life, sees that the boy isn't there, he will die. Your servant will bring the grey head of our father down to the grave in sorrow. Your servant will be guaranteed the boy's safety to my father. And I said, "If I do not bring him back to you, I will bear the blame before my father all my life. Now then," this is the thing, "now then, please let your servant remain here as your lord's slave." That was my lord's slave in place of the boy. Judah's offering to stand in to sacrifice his own life in order that they can have the food and they can be free. So now please let your servant remain here as my lord's slave in place of the boy, and let the boy return with his brothers. How can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? No, do not let me see the misery that would come upon my father. Number 4 is reunited. Now Joseph breaks down into tears, and he actually talks to them and reveals himself to them. The whole family is reunited and are able to come to Egypt for safety during the famine, and they bring their flocks with them, and it's a time of protection and a season to prosper. So, as I read earlier on, Romans 4:17, "As it is written, I have made you a father of many nations. He is our father in the sight of God, in whom he believed, the God who gives life to the dead and calls into being things that were not." The things, we have a son potentially dead. We have things that aren't working out, but now through God, they are. But this is not the end of the story. Joseph is given a double blessing. Like the shirt situation, he actually receives an inheritance. He's given 2 tribes. He's given Manasseh and Ephraim. But what of Judah? What happened to Judah? If you look at Matthew 1, verse 1, and we read the genealogy, there's a bit of a clue. It says the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah. That's the clue at the top of the thing. It's a spoiler alert. But if you read the genealogies, often we overlook the genealogies of things, but it's very important that we read them. This is the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac. Isaac was the father of Jacob. Jacob was the father of Judah and his brother. Now, and his brothers. And now they mention Judah, the father, but they also mention Perez and Zerah, and they also mention Tamar. You don't see that happening. It's very rare that you see that sort of thing happening. They all get a mention. And then Mathan is the father of Jacob, and we go all the way down. It goes to and Jacob, the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, and Mary was the mother of Jesus, who was called the Messiah. Judah is vindicated and redeemed, and through his line, Christ comes in. The Messiah comes through his line. It's an amazing change of situation, and this family has come reunited to actually establish itself. And obviously, we know that eventually they're going to go back into captivity again, but the family is reunited and actually starts to work as a proper family, where there's lots of forgiveness and stuff like that. Number 5, which is my last. I think it's my last. I might have another one after this. Number 5 is recover the promise. So if you're a Christian and you've at some point somebody from that line from Jesus has come to you, goes all the way back. We've been grafted on to this family. Go all the way back to when Jesus was here. Somebody passed it on to somebody else, who passed it on to somebody else. Somebody has gone into the gap for you so that you can know Jesus and you can have a relationship with him. So I'm going back to the Isaiah 61, verse 1 to 4. The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me, because the Lord has anointed me to proclaim good news for the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom to the captives and release from darkness the prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favour and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn and provide for those who grieve in Zion, to bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of joy. So this is the response from those that have been in captivity. Instead of ashes, we receive oil of joy. We receive a crown of beauty. This is the great escape. This is the great escape. We know the only way through to God is through Jesus. We are in the year of the Lord's favour now. This is time for us to claim our inheritance. It's time for us to rise up and not to be bound up in grief and regret and trying to turn back the clock. We have to face who we are through Christ, through what he's done for us. Number 6, rescue. Now, as I say, people have given up their lives and done things for us so that we can know Christ. And it was quite funny, because I was actually telling Sharon and Andy about the bit in the film with Steve McQueen at the end, which I thought really, it actually touched me, because I think it hit me. It made me realize what we're here for as Christians. We're not, like I said, we're not here to be bound up and imprisoned. We're here to be free. And you can actually be in prison and be free in the natural sense. You can be in prison and be free. So this point is a Steve McQueen has played a guy called Holtz. He was an American pilot, and he keeps on escaping. And the escape committee in the prison are aware that he's planning to escape, and they call him in and they say, see here, Holtz, we understand that you want to escape, old boy. You're planning to get out. What we want you to do is, when you go out, could you just go and see what's beyond the trees and make a sort of map so we know where to go when we want to escape? We've got a plan to get everybody out of the camp. Now, he has then had to sacrifice himself, go out of the camp, get some information. Apparently it wasn't the surrounding area, because they knew generally where things were. They had maps and things, but it was just beyond the trees. They didn't know the immediate layout. So they needed to know when they were going to escape what was beyond the trees. So he goes out there and he comes back and he gets put in the cooler, which those things were actually, I think on the film, it's quite sanitized. Some of those things were like horrendous, like they'd sweat half to death in those places. They were terrible. So he goes out, he agrees to it and goes out and gets the plans for their escape. We Christians, we are already out. We've already escaped death. We've already escaped that. But we've got a map. We've got a Bible that we can help people, lead people back to Christ, back to God, like the family. It's just like the story, really. So we have to be prepared to sacrifice our comfort and be prepared to go back for others, so that they, through Christ, they can experience the favor of God. We've had our sins forgiven, and they need to have their sins forgiven so that they can be saved. So this is the Great Escape. John 3:16. But God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. But God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. So, the Great Escape. What's your role going to be today? What are you going to do for God? And if you don't know God, then contact Sharon and Andy, contact Father's House, and we'll lead you to that. That's it. Thanks.